Hello, everyone. Welcome to my presentation. My name is Michael Winans. I'm a PhD student at Arizona State University, and my talk today is on the willingness to use call tools. It's a professionalization study of second language teaching education students. To understand an overview of where this data came from, it was collected as part of a dissertation for my PhD in linguistics and applied linguistics at Arizona State. And my committee was Aya Matsuda was the chair, Brian Smith and Mark James were my committee members. And the focus of this project was to really develop an understanding of the social process of professionalization for those students enrolled in second language teacher education. Now, professionalism itself is hard to define. It lacks a clear definition, but includes all the knowledge that is used to engage in the professional lives of second language teachers. This is in constant flux, and it changes with the demands of language acquisition. More generally, Lung has defined a professional as a trained qualified specialist who displays a high standard of competent conduct in their practice being second language teaching. And professionalization, I developed this definition as part of this project. It is a social process of progressive alignment that involves the development of skills, identities, norms, and values associated with communities of practice. And in this particular case, we use the term progressive alignment, meaning the inside-out nature of learning, or more accurately, how we progressively align or line up, we integrate our attunement or the attunement of the learner with the eco-social world in which we engage. And we are engaging in this world of teaching second language within a community of practice. And these communities are produced by the collective learning that results in practices that reflect both the pursuit of our enterprises and the attendant social relations. So the practices are the property of the community of practice, and they're created over time by sustained pursuit of a shared enterprise. And so those two terms go into my definition of what professionalization is, where progressive alignment is coming from socio-cognitive approach, which we'll talk about shortly. Here is a visual depiction of the full professionalization study. What we're going to focus on today, though, is a qualitative part of it. Specifically, we're going to look at the interviews that were done with some of the students. The research context was within an SLA course for a master's of second language teaching education course that was online. We had 13 participants, and each participant gave a 30 to 40 minute interview where the topic was professionalization. The subset of data that we're going to be discussing today is particularly about this one question, which was, how willing are you to use digital tools to teach language? Here's an overview of the participant demographics. It covers their gender, their formal education, teaching experience, and additional languages spoken. You can pause if you want to check it out more. And then this talks about the home countries and teaching context, because some are teachers, some have never taught. And so this talks about whether they're teaching online, whether they're only online because of COVID, or whether they haven't taught before. It also talks about the diversity of the students. Most are from the United States, but some who are in the United States, like participant 13, lives in Korea, because he's a Korean heritage speaker. And so he went back there and he's teaching English as well as working on his own language. And then we also have other folks like from the person from Uzbekistan, participant 11 lives in Korea, who's ethnically Korean. And then we have two participants from Jordan and one from Egypt. And several of the people from the United States got some teaching experience in other countries. So now I want to talk about the methodology, which was a socio-cognitive approach, which I mentioned earlier, and the actual method. For method, the data gathering was online via Zoom interviews, of course, during COVID. And then the way that I analyze the data is through membership categorization analysis. So we'll talk about both of those. The socio-cognitive approach is an educational framework, but it's often used by Atkinson to talk about second language acquisition. And so we can also talk about how it is used to socialize new students into the profession, or professionalization, the way in which they've become professionals in the second language teaching community or community of practice. So the data viewed is through a socio-cognitive lens, which sees humans as adapted to adapt, as having evolved into a niche species in which teaching and learning are lifelong processes that are essential to our survival. And during these processes, we progressively align with one another and the environment in a mind-body world continuum. So instead of just cognitive being in the brain or just sociocultural perspective, which is kind of outside in, it's a continuum from the cognitive to the social world and with each other within an environment. So the question then raises, how do second language teaching and education students align to the need for teachers to teach with and through technology in a progressively digital and digitizing world? So the way I analyzed this information was through membership categorization or analysis, or MCA. And so these are some of the different codes that I use. So we have the MCD, or the membership categorization device. So that is the device that links different categories. So for example, family, mom and dad. And then at the bottom there, we have standard relational pairs. Standard relational pairs carry duties and moral obligations to one another. So if we think about the one that we're going to look at mostly, which is teacher and student, you have the teacher who has an obligation to the student to teach them language, in our case, and the student that has an obligation to the teacher to not disrupt the class, let's say, or do their homework or study, these different types of things. So among these different categories, student, teacher, there are category-bound activities, things that certain categories do. So like teachers teach and students learn. Those are activities, but then there's also predicates, which are kind of a category's characteristics, the implied thought about what is a mother or what is a teacher, or how should a child act, child-parent relationship, right? And so those are the things that we'll use in order to kind of situate these different meanings and explanations of how they work within MCA. So the results of my study on the willingness to use call tools, we can talk about the good. First off, 100% of interviewees expressed a willingness to expose their students to call and online tools, which is great because we do live in a digital and digitizing world. But the bad is that 23% of those respondents at first had a reactionary response and expressed a return to traditional methods, and actually explicitly more than once mentioned pen and paper as being the way that when I asked, are you willing to use call tools? And the answer was like pen and paper. So that's kind of alarming. It's almost a quarter of the respondents. And the ugly, with COVID, the use of call and online tools are associated with the pandemic. So even though I didn't mention the pandemic at all, it was not part of the study as a focus, there was an unsolicited 54% of respondents mentioning COVID. So the question arises, will the use of the tools continue after COVID, or do people, 54%, see a direct link between call and online tools and the use and the pandemic and the current state of things as they are? So in order to understand who's most willing, well, participant 12 said 100% willing to use or that's 1,000% willing to use call and online tools. Embracing technology is extremely important. If we look down below, we see the affiliation was positive. And then we can also see the membership categorization device of students and the membership categorization device of online tools. So we can see that call and online tools, as they're categorized, has the predicate that they give access to the target language, which I think a lot of us can agree. But then you also had the least willing participants. And in the least willing participants, we had participant number 9 talk about the fact that they had computers in the classroom, but we didn't use them. We did pencil and paper assessment, pencil and paper grading, and then there's a laugh. And we'll see that a little bit later too, that this laugh kind of indicates, I guess in my perception, a little bit of how ridiculous that sounds, because we live in a world that even right now, if you're viewing this, you're online watching me speak, and this is a completely digital interaction that we're having. And so I realize that this is the result of COVID, but I see it as continuing beyond COVID, that these sorts of conferences become very attainable to a lot of people with a lot of different topics that then can include, for example, the Global South. And so these types of materials give access to students. And even even this particular teacher then ended up saying that I can kind of connect students to materials that they can do on their own free time and stuff. So this particular teacher talked a lot about the use of pen and paper and going back to the traditional methods. And we'll see a quote from her a little bit later as well. And so actually, we can see there her quote again at the bottom here, participant number 9. But these reactionary responses, they're not 100% against it, right? So participant number 3 talks about going straight to technology without having to use paper or writing things, then it's not really good to implement technology. And I think there's an essence of truth there, right? We don't just implement technology for technology's sake. But I don't know about the use of paper and writing things as being the point of contention there. I think that probably using technology because it enhances access to the language or enhances what we're doing is a resource that's portable, is a resource that could be accessed from home. Those types of things are good reasons to use technology. But to just blanketly say to use paper or writing things seems more of a reactionary response going back to traditional perspectives. And in participant 7, we kind of saw a flip-flop in her initial response. So she talked at first saying, I see myself having students use pen and paper. And then she laughs because, again, we see that as kind of extreme in today's environment, right? So she talks about screen time, and that's one of the reasons why she might not do that. But then she ends up flipping a little bit later as she talks through some of these. She says offering them videos is really useful. Yeah, I'm going to be using some online stuff, and then laughs again because she realizes she contradicted what she said before. But just to be clear, still has this reactionary response where, you know, the online tools, the call tools are not replacing what is traditional. And that's what she wants to maintain here. So she says, I'm going to try to balance it with a lot of pencils and paper and hopefully books, which is logical, especially depending on grade, right? These materials can be very expensive. Most students have phones, but depending on their age, I mean, it really depends on the age group. And then lastly, participant 9 said, I can kind of connect students to materials. We talked about this before, but she says in class, we're going to do pencil paper work. So a very focused attention on the fact that they want to do these traditional methods of teaching. So we go through some of these different aspects that I learned from doing these interviews. We can look at these reactionary responses. There's ways to mitigate these and these challenges, right? So CALL is not an all or nothing approach. It's perfectly fine to use books and pens and paper, right? But just like you don't use technology for technology's sake, you don't want to use pens and paper because it's the thing that occurs to you that is somehow against this 100% technological immersion that we're in during the pandemic. So the pandemic itself may make this reaction worse. So participant 9 responded when I asked her that question. The first thing she said was, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of using CALL and online tools. I can't wait to go back into the classroom. I was teaching online about 2 years before COVID hit. So I'm kind of glad now that everyone has a taste of what I do. So she realizes that teaching online is hard, but because she's made to teach online, she's still having that reactionary pen and paper response. But it may be just that she's sick of the pandemic and not being in person, because obviously we can use technology in person as well. Digital literacy. It should be taught along with the implementation of CALL and online tools. So participant 13 talked about students just really need to be competent in using a computer. It's talking about the fact that we're living in a digital world. So of course, we're gonna need to have those internet literacy skills along with the implementation of CALL and online tools. Participant number 5 talked about her students having digital literacy problems. Very willing to bring in digital tools, but accessing it on their computers or getting them to understand is definitely a drawback. So we need to pair digital literacy with the teaching of language and CALL and online tools as well. And then the internet is a tool for learning. Uh, one of the participants stated that the problem is with the parents, the families. They don't believe in the effectiveness of using online things like they believe it's only for playing. So the internet's only for playing, not for teaching. And whenever she gives a student assignments online, the parents complain that they'll use YouTube to look at other things and they will play and we don't know what they're going to do. So the negative is that the parents are problematic. And the positive is that the teacher still assigns a call and online work despite the parents' implied rejection of this form of learning. So the parents and families see call and online tools not effective for learning, not effective for teaching, and used for playing. So there's really a reorientation of this medium, the digital medium in general, as useful for both teaching and learning, and especially since everything is kind of mediated through language, that of course this medium can be used to teach language. So CALL should also be used to support the learning that's going on within the classroom. Teaching during the pandemic with CALL and online tools supports the curriculum and their language learning. Participant 7 said that outside of the classroom, homework and interaction with the language via the computer, that CALL and online tools can be useful because they're not going to have, especially in an EFL setting, they're not going to have that interaction. And obviously, computer and CALL digital tools can provide that sort of interaction and engagement with real tasks and real people. Participant 12 said having those online resources outside of class and inside of class is extremely important. And so we need to understand that whatever curriculum we're teaching, that there are different programs designed for the students and that they are there to support the curriculum and language learning. And then lastly, I want to point out that there's a missing link for professionalization of second language teachers. And that missing link is the fact that teachers, professional teachers, use CALL and online tools. So if we talk about the membership categorization device of teachers and the activity, use CALL and online tools. When I asked about what is the definition, like how do you perceive a professional second language teacher? Only one of the 13 students made this particular connection. So we can see down here, a professional teacher is someone who supports students in their self-efficacy to know how to learn online, for example, now, or resources to continue their learning after class. So we only have one participant out of 13 who identified a professional teacher as somebody who is able to use CALL and online tools. And I think that that is the real problem because, of course, a teacher in today's day and age, especially a new teacher who has years ahead of them, is going to need to know how to identify the affordances of tools and be able to implement them in their classroom. And I would say that the other really important thing is that we need to have a CALL class, especially for MTESOL courses. We need to have a dedicated CALL class that's not just integrated, but a separate class that talks about and explains how this sort of teaching with CALL and online tools is different than just in-person teaching, and the way to identify affordances and things like this to be able to identify what sort of tools will support our students and support the teachers in the classroom or online. So thank you for watching. I appreciate you taking the time to watch my presentation. Please comment or email with any questions and attend my lightning talk on Thursday from 3:30 to 4 o'clock. And if you have any questions, my email's there and there are my references. Thanks a lot.